Welcome to the Business of Drinks, where we go behind the bottle, interviewing beverage innovators and icons about how they built their businesses.
We take a data-driven approach, analyzing the brands, products, and categories that get customers and consumers excited.
And we cover several drinks categories, from wine, beer, and spirits to non-alcoholic drinks, as well as THC, adaptogen, and functional beverages.
So whether you're working in drinks or just interested in the stories behind your favorite brands, join us each week as we explore how companies are unlocking growth at every stage in the game.
Thanks for joining us, and let's dive in. Welcome back to the Business of Drinks. I'm Erica Ducey.
And I'm Scott Rosenbaum. And today we're digging into one of the most incredible growth stories that we've seen in the ready-to-drink category.
Yeah, I'm so excited about this one. So I was recently on a Bump Williams Consulting webinar where they were analyzing the biggest players in the spirits-based RTD space. And they only looked at brands that were moving more than 100,000 cases. So you can think like High Noon, which who we interviewed Britt West in episode 35, and Surfside, another massive grower. We interviewed Clem Papas in episode 34. And then, I was listening and they go all the way up to number 3 in the ranking in momentum, this brand called Carbliss, Carbliss. And I was like, whoa. This brand had 131% growth over the past year, and I have never even heard of it.
Yeah, when you start to look at Carbliss's trajectory, it's really mind-blowing. They went from 400,000 cases sold in 2022. No small feat even to get to that point, but they continued that growth. They got to 1.5 million cases in 2023, 2.7 million cases in 2024, and this is according to Shanken Impact database. This level of growth for an independently owned 5-year-old startup is practically unheard of.
Exactly. So, of course, we had to learn more. My questions were, how does a brand scale this quickly in such a competitive category? And also, how did a small Wisconsin-based RTD go from a home experiment to 5 years later being a multi-million case powerhouse that's now expanding methodically across the United States?
And that is where our guest, Adam Kroener, comes in. He is the co-founder and president of Carbliss, and his approach to brand building has been anything but conventional, right? There is a reason why a lot of people haven't heard of this enormous brand. He uses a very narrow and focused, deep market expansion approach, right? This is a strategy that really creates organic demand before flooding the region with sales and resources, right? He is really rewriting the RTD route to market playbook.
Totally. And let's not forget, Carbliss isn't just winning on distribution, it's winning on liquid. Their flavors like lemon, black raspberry, cranberry, they sound pretty conventional, but they're crushing it in velocity per outlet. Bar owners and retailers are reporting that Carbliss is outselling competitors because it actually delivers on flavor, which is a key gap in the spirits-based RTD space, especially among brands that are low calorie, low carb.
Yeah. In this episode, Adam shares his playbook, right? Why he refuses to rely on traditional distributor models, how Carbliss prioritizes liquid to lips marketing over paid ads, and why his team is laser focused on building for the long term.
So if you're building a brand in the drinks business or you just love a great underdog story, this one is a must listen.
So let's get into it. Here's our conversation with Adam Kroener, co-founder and president of Carbliss.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Is your drinks brand looking to start or expand important distribution?
Whether you're seeking to enter new markets or you're unhappy with a current distributor and desiring a better fit, you should know about Swig Partners.
Founded by industry experts Eric Siegelbaum and Amy Troutmiller, Swig takes the guesswork and the legwork out of distribution strategy. Swig helps brands and distributors find the right fit for long-term relationships and sales success.
US-based importers and distributors should reach out too. With Swig, they can explore new products for free. And brands, you can get $100 off by mentioning Business of Drinks. Find out more at swigpartners.com/business of drinks. That's swigpartners.com/business of drinks.
Adam, thanks so much for coming on the Business of Drinks.
Thanks so much for having me, Erica.
Yeah, we're super thrilled to have you here, mostly because I was listening to a Bump Williams Consulting webinar where they were talking about the incredible traction of Carbliss. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a brand that I have to now do a quick deep dive into. And indeed, I was so thrilled to see what kind of traction your brand is having. So let's start at the beginning. Walk me through your background and how you ended up running a Bev Out company.
So my background is actually in CPG, so consumer packaged goods, but co-packing. So I'm actually going to let you guess. I'm from Wisconsin, and I worked in food manufacturing. So I want you to be as stereotypical as possible. I'll give you up to 3 guesses.
We're talking cheese.
Bingo. Easy peasy. I grew up in the co-packing space and kind of worked my way up from literally my job was a cheese cutter at some point. When I left that company, I was director of ops over about 1,200 different team members. And gosh, I think at that time, probably 25, 30 production lines. And so from a background perspective, really that was the simple catalyst for Carbliss because we created a product that we thought filled a gap from a flavor and carbonation and nutrition panel perspective. But I think most people get hung up in, oh, I have this great idea. Now I have to build a factory. Now I have to hire 100 people. And what I had the benefit for the last, 10, 12 years before is seeing all these brands. When you go to Walmart or Kroger and you see all these brands on the shelf, what I knew is most of them usually are coming from one manufacturing facility. Didn't know it existed in booze, but I knew it existed in a lot of other spaces. So once we decided we were going to do it, it was finding a way to make this formula into a scalable batch because I knew what I was making in my little home wouldn't work. And then after that, it was finding a co-pack partner. So that experience, although it doesn't seem like it would correlate, I think it was just a simple idea that I didn't need $20 million to get this brand on the store shelf.
Yeah, and that's such a key insight because, you see a range of brands doing it in different ways. I know for Athletic, for example, they were like, let's build it and then we'll have the, develop up the manufacturing and the process and everything. But I think that's such an interesting background and way in that just gives you so much insight into how to work effectively with co-packers, which we'll get into in a minute. But first I want to ask, the product that we see now, was that the original concept for Carbliss, or did it evolve along the way?
Yeah, no, it's the product is what it was at the beginning. I think we've probably, shifted terminologies just due to a better understanding of the market and ultimately what the product mix is. But to summarize, seltzers were doing very well, malt-based when we started. Vodka didn't exist at the time. And people were drinking it because it was low carb, low sugar, low calorie. And if you ask that consumer if they like the taste, they would say, nah, it's okay. Imagine, you said you're from New York. Imagine going to a Michelin 3-4-star restaurant and the chef sitting down and saying, how was your meal? And you said, meh, it's okay. And every consumer said that. Would they ever serve that meal again? And the answer is no. So in summary, our drink is a flavorful bar cocktail in a can. And that's it. It just has the nutrition benefits of what people were looking for in the seltzers.
Yeah. So, speaking to the flavor, At this point, Carbliss has huge traction and people really seem to love it. And we know that it is flying off the shelves in the markets where it is sold. So that tells me that you nailed the flavor and the taste. Tell me, what did the formulation process look like?
The original was different than the actual, meaning, so after we tried the OG seltzers and didn't like them, I literally did nothing but create what I thought should have been in that can. So when I first saw it, hey, that looks flavorful and fruity. When I tried it, the flavor did not match what I thought the label looked like. So the very first one we made is now called Lemon, but it was a vodka lemonade. And so from a formulation perspective, I will tell you that there wasn't really trials. I think that's often the thought process, but I wasn't trying at this point in June of 2018. I was just trying to make something that I would enjoy. That's it. Mm-hmm. And so literally within a day or two, we had this vodka lemonade. And then within a few weeks, I had like a pink grapefruit and a kiwi strawberry. And you'll notice those are not flavors. The other two are not flavors right now. So after a few months of making this, the bigger challenge was actually finding how do I get this into a big batch for a manufacturer. So we found one of our favorite partners to date is Sovereign Flavors out of California. And so I literally sent them what I was making, like all the ingredients I had. But I didn't realize, this is my buddy's water brand, Hello Water. So let's say I took this. What I didn't realize is this might have, 10 other ingredients.
Sure.
And so they have to kind of break that down to brass tacks and understand how to reformulate it because they don't know. And so that process actually took about 6 months. Gave them our money in August of 18, said this is going to be a business. Back and forth for months. I didn't like what I was getting. Eventually flew out there January 1st of 2019. Benefit of doing it in person is we got those 3 flavors plus another 3 formulated within about 5-6 hours.
Oh, wow. And what were the launch flavors?
The launch flavors were lemon lime, lemon, which was the original vodka lemonade. Doesn't have sugar, so the FDA won't let us, or the TTB won't let us call it lemonade. And then black raspberry, which to this day is actually our best-selling flavor in every single market, with the exception of 1 or 2 where it's maybe below cranberry by a point, but for the most part, still the best-selling in every market.
Wow, fascinating. All right, so, you launched Carbliss in 2019. Describe the first year.
So if we go like calendar year, the first calendar year was, we didn't discuss this before, but if I can do this, but the first calendar year was an absolute shit show. So we launch in home state of Wisconsin. We're using a liquor distributor there. It was an interesting process because I used a local friend who was a tobacco category manager for Kroger to get the name of the liquor buyer for Pick and Save. It was what it's called in Wisconsin. And she agreed to bring it in, which is how I got the first distributor. They ended up not bringing it in for another 2 years actually after that though. So that was interesting. But so the first launch, there's like 17,000 available accounts in home state of Wisconsin. We were in like maybe 250, 300 at the time. I was working full time, so was my wife. So I would literally hit accounts on my way to and from. So in 2019, if we go first year from launch, within about 3 months, I had to pay back 75% of my revenue because we used a local in-state co-packer who did not have the morals and ethics that I did in my previous world. That was a blind assumption that I had made that everybody operated the same way I did. Everything was leaking. And to this day, he'll tell you that it's our liquid, and you can tell by the liquid that we haven't revamped and the velocity per outlet that we have that it's not the liquid.
Yeah.
And so January of 2020, go through that. We switched manufacturers to one out in Idaho. And it was a mixture of MOQ for us because we were operating out of our personal bank account and, ability to do spirits and carbonate spirits, because at this time, this is like right around when High Noon launched, nobody else was really doing spirits. So the idea of a slim can spirits and carbonated in a co-pack network was not normal. So find these guys in Idaho, make the first run in March, goes well. We wanted to launch our cranberry that May or something like that. Went to go put in a PO in May of 2020, which is 2 months after COVID, and they always told us 30 days lead time. That product got made in November of 2020, so we literally had 4 months of zero revenue. So yeah, our first year was everything leaked, and then got some good product made, and then zero revenue for another 3 or 4 months.
Wow.
So yeah, that was the first year.
Oh my gosh. I mean, yeah. And you're talking about the ups and downs. You have to really, if you're working with a co-packer, develop those partnerships and find the people that you can trust and who really can deliver. So now that you've had the benefit of working with co-packers who do deliver, tell me, were there warning signs about the ones who didn't deliver, and or what are the strategies of effectively working with a co-packer and building a strong relationship?
Yeah, and so ultimately the reason they're gone is because of their lack of accountability. Was there warning signs? The first one, if I look back, the guy was super arrogant, and that's usually a telltale. The second one, I'll admit that the manufacturer in Idaho, they work 410s. In Wisconsin, if we say we work 410s and the customer demand ends up being 710s, that's how it's going to go. Mm. And they were just very adamant about 410s, and that's culturally a different thing than what we have in the Midwest. So it did start to create some better questions for me. As far as our first co-packer and the first few after that, I've never done contracts out of the gate. And my first two make me happy I don't. Because we have an insurance thing that we're working on, and they were asking, why is Adam so adamant to not have contracts? And I'll put it in a relationship. Are you married, Erica?
Yes.
Okay. So let's say things are, you and your husband have been arguing. Would you rather have your husband stay married to you because A, he loves you and he sees a future in 20 or 30 years with you, or only because you have a marriage certificate?
I'm going to go with A.
Right. And so to me, that's the difference in a relationship of a co-pack or distributor. It doesn't matter. I need somebody who's going to do this to work on us, right? And so the first two partners proved very fast that they were all about them, and that's all that mattered. So I was able to not have any commitments, no contract, and I got out. It's basically that, first few dates sucked. See you later.
Yeah, trial relationship.
Correct. And so our very first co-packer that did well is Red Boot Distillery out of Iowa. To this day, he does over 1 million cases for us, and we don't have a contract because now our insurance company tells me I'm stupid. But at the end of the day, I am so confident that worst comes to worst, Stuart and I will figure it out together, because it hasn't been perfect on either of our ends for the last few years, but we always figure it out. And it's sometimes, it's not I would say the art of the deal, Donald Trump, there's got to be a loser in the negotiation.
Sure.
We do it in a way that when something bad's happening, we'll take a little bit this time, they'll take a little bit next time, or maybe we both take a little bit. But we're focusing on being partners in 5 or 10 years and not what's best for us right now.
Right, exactly. So you're both invested in the relationship equally, it sounds like, and with the idea that, look, the rising tide is going to benefit all the boats here.
100%.
Yeah, awesome. Now let's turn a little bit to the building of the brand. What were some of the effective early tactics that helped Carbliss build a following?
Well, so I will be very frank in that I think we haven't even really started to build brand. And I know you're seeing the movement. Even if you look at all of our marketing, it's focused on product, which to me is not necessarily marketing or advertisement. So I'm going to first back up with the difference in why we don't do that, and then I think that'll lead to the answer to the question. Our product is different than anything on the market by far and wide. If you look at our reviews or some of the customer service stuff I've posted, nothing exists like it. I go back to, I drank beer for a lot of years, but from the age of 13 when I first tried beer, I didn't like beer till I was like 24. Bourbon, you don't turn 21 and love bourbon. It's an acquired taste, right?
Yeah.
Is Kool-Aid an acquired taste? Is a Capri Sun an acquired taste? No, we either like it or we don't, right?
Sure.
And
Sure.
there's been this weird thing in booze where we have to acquire the taste. The cool thing about Carbliss is 99 people out of 100 will just love it when they drink it. So the fact that it's so different and the fact the nutrition panel is what it is, our go-to-market has just been product, liquid to lips, liquid to lips, liquid to lips. And so when you think about that high velocity per outlet, I recognize that I could close about 90% of accounts when I was traveling back and forth from work. And then we would do sampling, and I'd sell every time I do a sampling. The managers are like, "This is like 3 or 4x anything I've ever sold in 2 hours." So we took those like kind of boots on the ground learning and have really just exploded it now with the entire team. So we hired a market manager. That was our first hire. She did amazing. Then we hired, okay, this proves the concept that we can close a lot. And then we had somebody, his name's Mike Dempsey, worked a lot of years for Mike's Hard Lemonade, Tipsy Tomato, a few other RTD brands. But he's helped us, formalize and process that. So going back to marketing, I always tell our distributors, and we're going to start to evolve this in mature markets. We market where we sell. If I put a billboard up right next to your house and you see a tall white skinny can saying it's flavorful, and you've tried 30 of them, you're like, yeah, okay. None of them have flavor. Like your marketing's no different than the next guy.
Sure.
The only way I can prove it to you, because everybody else has said the same thing, is to get you to drink it. So our entire process is revolved around that. We are now getting to a point where we need to create brand and the way people feel about the product. But we just, with being small and scrappy with dollars, we felt we had to get people drinking it before we could even create that.
Yeah. And, I've heard you talk about Carbliss's narrow and deep strategy for building the markets that it's in. Can you talk me through what that strategy looks like? Like, how many states are you in right now, and how have you approached building each of those markets?
Yep. So Wisconsin, for lack of better words, was our first and only statewide launch. But to say we're in 250 accounts in the first month, like that's not really a statewide launch. I think now we're probably in 13 or 14,000 in Wisconsin alone. So now when we launch, and part of this was learning, by the way, we did try going other places because that's what consultants told me. I found consultants only have their monthly P&L in mind and not the longevity of my business for the most part. And then, so we retracted, and now we do 1 to 3 distributors at a crack, and we're using beer distributors. So I'll use Minnesota, for example, right next to Wisconsin. And so we launched with Dahlheimer, which is one of the state's bigger Molson Coors distributors. And then like a few months later, started launching with other distributors in the state. And so by doing that, we get this really focused area. And what happens is that 2-3 counties over, the consumer doesn't see that. So let's say they drive 5 miles, and every bar they go to has Carbliss. And then they go back home and they drive 2 miles the other way, and they can't find Carbliss anywhere. And the bar owners are like, what? It honestly creates a pull from the consumer rather than a push. And I mean, you saw the same data that I see, regardless if you're looking at Circana or Nielsen. We're sold to 15-20% of the nation's population and top 5 RTD in the nation, with about a third of the weighted distribution. So I would say by far and wide the system works.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because I think the momentum just, I saw something on Shanken Impact Database talking about how the brand just moved so quickly, going from like 400,000 cases in 2022 to 1.5 million in 2023 to 2.7 million cases in 2024. Like, it was throwing off numbers of like 131% growth year over year. Like, that's astounding for a brand that doesn't have a, huge corporate infrastructure behind it. So, like, what would you say are the key? It sounds like the narrow and deep strategy is part of it, but what are the other key drivers that have really helped you build that momentum?
We do believe in the narrow and deep by far and wide. But that narrow and deep also creates a bit of a carrot from the distributor side. So Ohio is one of the states we launched last year, and we're almost done with it. But we have, and I won't talk about the actual goals, but we have goals for on-premise and off-premise that we give them when we launch. And to be frank, a lot of times we won't go. So we launched Ohio, we launched Cleveland and Toledo with True House and Munch and House La Rose. Awesome partners, and everybody south of them is going, when can we get it? When can we get it? Well, when your buddies up north hit their distribution goals. And so it holds their feet to the fire. And if we're being frank, what we ask for goals just pays them a shit ton more money if they get it done. So it's beneficial for everybody. But by using that, we're like, hey, we don't need to rush to a new market. Our P&L looks great. We're happy to add you when it's going to be beneficial. But we see so much good happen in surrounding markets when the current markets are hitting those targets. So it's selfish for us, but it also becomes selfish for the distributor because they're not used to a supplier telling them this is how it's going to be, or telling them no, or asking them to wait. Because it's usually somebody needs to pad their P&L. Let me send you a truck tomorrow. And we're like, oh, we talked today. We might launch you in a year. And so, yeah, I think I got off topic of the original question.
No, that's great. Yeah. So let's talk a little. You mentioned on-premise, and the product being in a lot of bars, and that being a pull for retail, and certainly also for distribution. I mean, it's like the carrot is there, and they're saying like, "Hey, how can we get a piece of this?" What does that mix look like, on-premise versus off-premise?
Our volume, it did start to decrease a little bit in 24. I just mentioned Ohio, so we have great data. So that means we go into every chain pretty much as soon as we ask or when the reset hits, which then skews the data. About a year ago, we were probably at around 51% of our sales were on-prem, and I want to say in trailing 12, we're at like 42%.
Wow. Yeah. So what do you find is right now the focus? Like, are you guys really focused on building up on-premise or off-premise as like a key channel, or is it just kind of everything is our intention is like go, go, go?
Always both.
Yeah.
Yes, go. But we spend about half the year focusing on-prem. We spend another half the year focusing on off-prem.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So do you focus on off-prem in the beginning part of the year? I'm just like thinking about how that, I mean, do you break it up like in terms of like half of the calendar year, or do you think about it more sort of as like you're working on both at all times?
So you're in New York. It's very similar weather to Wisconsin. What 6 months would you say is it always sunny and 70 in New York?
Well, it's like sunny and 90 for much of the summer.
Okay. So the opposite of that, it's always sunny and 70 in the bar.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
And just think about where the pull is likely to come from at what time, and that probably lines up with how we focus.
Nice. So let's go back a little bit to the beginning. I think a lot of our listeners will be curious about, how did you build the infrastructure? How did this company come to be? So now we know, like, you had this background in contract manufacturing, which definitely helped you understand the landscape of how to build. How did you fund the early days of Carbliss, and what financial hurdles have you had to overcome in this, several past years here?
So I funded it.
Yeah.
So starting out, so my wife she graduated with an accounting degree, but she's been a VP of small businesses in the past. Actually just stepped down to join Carbliss. She was a CFO for a very large, almost $1 billion organization. So she's very smart when it comes to money.
Yes,
I've always
and this
been
is
very,
your wife?
yes, yeah. And I've always liked cars, but I've always been outside of that very fiscally conservative and like very budget minded. So when we launched, both of us had a few rental properties. We had recently, been dating for a few years. We weren't married at the time and moved into one house. So to really, I'll call it hedge our bets, we just sold our rental properties. And then we took about $100,000 and said, okay, this is what we're going to put in. I think it was a little south of that. Because of her knowledge of small business stuff, we were able to get a $50,000 line of credit year one. Based on some stuff that some consultants told me, I had a totally egregious, ridiculous budget for 2020. Yeah, 2020. And then based on that ridiculous budget and the movement we had already had, we got a $350,000 line of credit. And that basically got us all the way through 2020. But since then, cash has always been the problem up until close to a year ago. And I'll try to make it quick, but we had a gentleman that was local in July of 20 say, hey, I'd love equity in your business. And we said, yeah, we're bootstrapping this, not going to happen. About a month later, I actually met this guy, Tom Bushke, and he was telling how he was on his second beverage company, and it was all fundraised. Quite frankly, when the guy asked me about equity, I only knew of Shark Tank. So it was, I think it's going to be valued here. You're going to tell me I'm stupid. Take 50% of my company. What Tom helped me understand was that we were never looking to make a buck from it, really. It was getting this thing into the market. But he framed it up as like, let's say your goal is to make $30 million as a founder. You can bootstrap it and sell it for $30 million in 30 years and own 100% of it. Or you could get venture capital involved. They could help you, grow it really fast. You own 10% of it. You sell it for $300 million in 5 years. And that simple math problem was like, oh, that's why, like, not saying I want to give up the company, but that simple frame up, I never understood why people would want to give so much up. And I didn't understand the value of the catalyst to move the business faster.
Yeah.
So we ended up, once I learned from Tom, I went back to the gentleman and basically gave him first right of refusal. We agreed on a valuation that Shark Tank would have told him and me we were both idiots, but I'll tell you, he'll be a very happy camper someday. So he gave us $1 million in angel funding. And then about a year later, he tied all of his assets, a lot of his assets, to be able to collateralize through a bank, a local bank. And that was about 2 or 3 years. And last year, Bank of America, one of the biggest banks in the world, gave us, they took all of his asset ties away and more than doubled our line of credit just by the cash flow of the business.
Wow.
And I was very clear that when I found a bank that bet on us, I will be their customer for life. And yeah, anytime I got told no 60 times. And of course, now everybody wants to be my friend. It's like, screw off. I'm with Bank of America for life at this point.
Yeah. Love to hear that success story. So let's dive in a little bit to the operational challenges. I mean, in just 5 years, you've scaled up more than a lot of drinks businesses ever achieve in terms of annual production. So what have been the key operational challenges along the way?
Well, we talked about co-pack network a little earlier. The selfish benefit to a co-pack network is if my current group can't do it and I need to add on 5 million cases next year, there's 30 or 40 people in the country that I can now call. As where, the challenge for my OpEx days is if sales says, hey, we need another 5 million tomorrow or next year. And right now would maybe be okay. But One, it's did we allocate the capital 6 months ago? And then really the bigger challenge is after COVID, all these lead times are horrendous. So it's now 18 months to get a new machine if we're at capacity. And then at the same time, we got to probably hire another 20 people to support that. And then you always end up in this demand flux of, are the people need more time, whatever. So this co-pack network just allows us to focus on growing our current partners. And then as soon as the levee breaks and they don't want to grow or we'd be too much of their business, we add on the next one. So we preemptively are actually going to add one on in Toronto here in about 2-3 weeks, where we've agreed that there's no volume requirements, but it is literally just to support the growth of the infrastructure and allows us that when we go northeast, that we can just drop right in and be, within a day of any of our distributors, which is really the long-term goal is as we expand, we want to be within 1 day of any of our distribution partners.
Yeah, yeah. And let's talk a little bit about that expansion. So you're currently in 14 states, I believe.
13 as of this moment. I'll be flying to Indiana later today, and it'll be our second, really the first since Wisconsin, and probably the first real one, the first real whole state launch. And that'll be happening throughout this week.
And what does expansion look like for the rest of the year? Are there more states? And you mentioned Toronto. Are we thinking Canada?
No. Same thing as I say for the thousands of people that ask me for an NA every year. We do really well and only sell to 20% of the nation. Rather than, it is hard as an entrepreneur to not kite on this, but I'd rather rinse and repeat to the 80%. And use the process that I know works, the formula and the product, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. So similarly, I'll hit the 80% of the U.S. likely before we talk about Canada, because just a different selling style in different countries.
Yeah. All right. And you mentioned an NA product, which would be interesting, but talk me through the product line. What does it look like now and how is it evolving?
So again, the product is by far and away so different than anything on the market. And if you go back, and I've just come to truly believe the original malt-based seltzers were premiumized by brands like High Noon in the consumer's eyes, where they made them spirits-based, right? And so there's different brands that have come out. I talked to Bryce from Mom Water a fair amount. And so we know that people don't really like that blast of carbonation, right? So they premiumized it, they made it vodka-based, and then they took all the carbonation out. And so we looked at it and basically said, well, we don't want to have zero carbonation, we want some. So it's like a bar cocktail, and just has a really great nutrition panel. So when I think about all this premiumization, we selfishly have a product, in my opinion, better and different than anything on the market. So we just literally use data from our distributors of what's the product that's in the cooler that you can't get out because we don't have a replacement flavor for. Meaning, like when we first launched, we had black raspberry. White Claw Black Cherry sold a ton. And in Wisconsin, Black Cherry did really well. So our salesperson was like, hey, I can't get Black Cherry out. And I'm like, well, use black raspberry. She's like, I know that, but, and this is fair on the bar owner side, Black Cherry pays the bills. It sells a lot of, why would I remove that? And so we're like, well, if we can make a Black Cherry taste better, doesn't it make sense to do that? So we did. And so that's kind of been the continual, we'll use data to go, okay, does, I get asked for grape a fair amount. If you can name a alcoholic beverage that is grape, that's in a canned cocktail that sells a lot of, please tell me. There's none in the data set.
Yeah.
But there are flavors that sell that we haven't created yet. So if I know I can make it better, I'd rather just let you create the market. I'll be a fast follower and make the product better.
Totally. Interesting. So talking a little bit about back in the early days, I know that listeners will be interested in hearing about how you secured that first major retailer or the first distribution deal. Like what strategy did you use?
So one thing that we've seen is that distributors often, the go-to is, hey, here's our plan, here's our strategy, here's all the stuff we've done, and it still happens to this day. They look at the data, oh, that's amazing. What chains do you have? What chains do you have?
Sure.
And so they've almost built this mantra that they don't bring in a new brand unless they have chains. And so we actually started holding back chains because of it. So that is a now thing. But at the beginning, I was talking to a few distributors. They weren't getting back to me. And it was like, well, shit, if I get them a customer, they can't really say no, or they're not going to want to say no. So a local friend of mine was a tobacco category manager, which I bridged a little bit for Roundy's Kroger. Kroger's the big brand here in Wisconsin. It's called Pick and Save. So I said, hey, from a sales, I had done sales outside of the cheese factory stuff. And the one thing I knew is if I'm not trying to sell, there's a really good chance I can get all the answers. So I said, hey, who's your counterpart in alcohol? So she gives me the name. And I reach out to her and I said, hey, I know you're probably super busy. I'm looking at creating a brand. So I have some samples. I'd love to show you what the label looks like, get your feedback, and that's it. So we met for an hour, showed her the label, sampled her on the liquid. She loved it. Two things that she said that I recall, what's your advice for somebody like me who wishes to sell with Kroger someday? And she said two things. One was GS1 certified label. And to this day, I didn't know what the heck that was. So all of our UPCs are certified because she told us. And then she had mentioned to look at like some weird kind of innovations like botanicals, which we opted not to do for other reasons. But at the end of the meeting, sample the liquid. Hey, if I get this on the shelf, which most people like myself don't, would Kroger be likely to bring this in?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. Of course, Adam. You're local, makes sense. So now I went back to the distributor and said, I'm going to be making this brand, and Kroger said they buy it, which is 130 stores in Wisconsin, or at least at that time. Well, now they want to talk.
Nice.
And so it was, the cart before the horse. It's a difficult one, especially in this game, because unfortunately, and the distributors will admit it, they've become conditioned to taking, oh, well, you don't have any chain stuff? I'll pass.
Yeah.
And so I get it, because they get inundated with people like us.
Yeah.
They're getting hundreds of requests. So that's their way to filter it. I think we're teaching them that that's not always the best thing, because we'll be around for decades, not 2 years, like a lot of the ones that might have chain authorizations. But it's just, we have to prove that we're different.
Yeah.
And we have a method to do that. And luckily, everybody sees through all the work and time that we spend on putting it together, the distribution, even though they want to see chain, they see the work we're putting in, they see the data. And when you see the data, by the time we get to you, it's either it's in your house or somebody's taking your share. Pick one.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So tell me about you mentioned that liquid to lips and supporting the distributors is a big part of the strategy. What does the sales and marketing organization look like for your company?
So sales is led by our EVP, Mike, who I mentioned earlier. A lot of great experience building out Malt RTD, then Spirit RTD in his past life, as well as building out like C-Store and stuff. So there's 3 sales directors. We have what we call Central, Midwest, and Great Lakes region. And then we have about 35 market managers, and the market managers are boots on the ground sales. So from my understanding, Tito's has 4 or 5 people in the state of Wisconsin. Anheuser-Busch has 4 people. We also have 4 people, and clearly not as big as those brands. Illinois, we already have 7. Missouri, we have 3, 4. Ohio, we have 3, already hiring 4. We have 4 in Michigan. And so their job is to really focus on the accounts. And said another way, our distributors should help us get as many pods in as many accounts as possible. Our job as a brand, which I don't think most brands will actually focus on, our job is to make sure it doesn't sit in the retail accounts. And so going back to the marketing thing, That's why we focus on the liquid to lips, because we can guarantee it, and it creates that word of mouth organic spread.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let's talk a little bit about the customers. So, what demographics or psychographics would you say are most represented among your customers?
Well, first, I'm going to say I think a lot of people, and this has been shifting, but if you go back 20 years, the consumer thought Mick Ultra was a girly drink. Why? Because they focused on carbs and sugar. Um, and now we get that from time to time, and then the distributors and retailers see very quickly once we're in the market. This is our brand is very 50-50 male female. Now, why is that? I think about if I'm dieting, which is part of the reason why this brand exists, but if I would have 2 or 3 seltzers, going back 7 years ago, the traditional seltzers, which I didn't like them. Then I'd be like, screw it, and I'll give me an IPA, a porter, something that tastes good and is full of flavor, right?
Yeah.
Women are more disciplined when it comes to their diet, I think, than most men. So men might have 1 or 2 of these other drinks, and then they'd go to maybe back to their full-fledged Budweiser or Busch, whatever, right? The benefit of our product tasting really good is the nutrition benefits is just an added benefit. So I'm just drinking something I enjoy. It is literally the I can have my cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
Now to go back to our original from a demographic perspective, we assumed 25 to maybe like 45 male, and then 25 to like 55 female. And the reason we thought that was this girly drink perception. I would say the older demographic of men have more, I'll call, maybe pride on what a man is. I usually argue if you're defined as a man by what you drink, feel sorry for your wife.
Good luck.
But the thing that we found, we said 25 because, now mind you, we decided this before High Noon launched, and I think they've done a great job for brands like us in paving the way. But we thought the consumer's not going to pay $10.99 for a 4-pack. Like, we get taxed so much more than the malt products, right?
Yeah.
And I think really what Barstool helped High Noon do is make the consumer go, I'm just going to get exactly what I want. And so going back to the story I was saying when I maybe bought a rack of, Keystone or Busch Light before it was at a premium price when I was 13, 14 years old, it was because it was the cheapest buzz I could get.
Yeah.
But today's consumer wants authentic, and ours literally tastes like you're biting into the fruit, so super authentic. But they want it so bad that they're willing to pay the price, meaning instead of having 12 cheap beers, they'd rather have 4 or 5 Carbliss. And so from a demographic perspective, it is insane to go to a few bars in a place where we sell, because you will see the 21-year-old girl at the sorority drinking Carbliss, if the sorority lets them drink, I guess, on the college campus or those areas, the 22-year-old guy, but also our number 9 best-selling chain is the American Legion. So if you go to a VFW or an American Legion and you've got men and women who are 60 to 85, they're also enjoying multiple Carbliss.
Wow.
So it's just been very interesting to see how when you make the product really good and you focus on getting everybody to try it, it's to me, it's this benefit of people drink it because of the product, not because of the brand. And that's why the brand creation will happen after, because if we would have focused on the 25 to 40-year-olds, there's no way the 80-year-old guy at the VFW would have grabbed it, right?
Yeah.
Because we would have focused so much on something that he couldn't associate with. So it's going to give us good data to really now take that consumer and create something for each one as we mature the brand and the marketing associated with it.
I mean, it's interesting because I think that I read that you and your wife had started the brand partially because you were on diets and
It was keto.
that it was like like keto or like low carb, low calorie sort of philosophy there. But I mean, hey, doesn't that describe most of America at this point, right? And so I think like it does seem that the appeal is quite broad. So it's fascinating to hear that you're seeing like the full range of legal drinking age customers there, all the way from 21 to, into their probably, 70s and 80s at the VFW. I'm curious, do you find that the people who gravitate organically to the brand, um, I'm thinking of like influencers on TikTok and like people who are talking about it on social media. Do you find that they have more of like, they're kind of more like wellness focused? Like, is it kind of headed down that path, or it's just like really just anyone?
It goes. It honestly goes in such. If I were to think about every influencer that's reached out to me, there's the 40-year-old white dude with a big beard. There's the 22-year-old college athlete. There's the 28-year-old or the 50-year-old wellness focused. But then I've had a lady who is a type 1 diabetic. Mm-hmm. And she goes, Adam, I want to be your influencer. This product's great. It doesn't impact my glycemic index. I can find, like, I'm not supposed to drink alcohol, but I do. So I'm glad I can have something that doesn't impact it. And for those reasons, I actually said, hey, that's a health issue. And we're booze. I can't correlate them.
Sure.
But I think that just gives you a landscape of, it is a little bit of everybody wants to be a part of it. But again, the product is so different. And the amount of times we get to see people's eyes just go, well, holy shit, like this exists. I've probably sampled 20,000 bar owners. And I bet you 1,000 times, that is not a joke. I have had them say, I've seen, anywhere from 20 to 1,000 of you in my career, and this is the best product I've ever tasted.
Wow.
And every single one will caveat with the same thing. I'm not blowing smoke because you're standing here. But because we hear it over and over, it just lends me to believe that, yes, I believe them to be telling the truth, but I think just lends light to how different this product really is.
Yeah.
And how, true and authentic the flavors are.
Amazing. All right. So wrapping up here, what's next for Carbliss? What are you most excited about heading into 2025?
Well, so this will be one, what I'm excited about is this week being our first state launch. So everything we do, going back to the narrow and deep, is methodical. We've never launched more than, I think, 3 states in a year. So we're doing our first full state. We're not planning on doing more full state, but it'll be a learning curve for us. So we could, and then we're launching 6 more states this year. So the benefit of how we build the infrastructure ends up being, we're going bigger, we're going faster, but we're doing it at our own, like, very methodical pace. We've got a lot of competition in this realm, and most of them have success in 3 or 4 states. Then they go national. But what I'm excited about is when we look at all the data and the Schenken data, we're still doing this in ultimately what is flyover states for all the big guys. And we're literally a top competitor in dollars and cases in the nation. So it's only up from here.
Yeah. All right. And last question. So let's say that a drinks entrepreneur asks you for a recommendation. Could be a book or a person, movie, industry group, what have you. Something to provide business insights. Who or what would you say that they should follow to provide those insights?
I would probably give a few books. The first one, which was a catalyst for me for my life 10 years ago, has nothing to do with beverage alcohol, but it's How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And I think the biggest thing about that book is, from a team to distributors to retailers, if you follow those concepts like to a T and you continue to focus on them, I believe you can be successful in any segment. And then again, not beverage alcohol related, but if you're a founder, I read this book too late. I recommend it to a lot of people that reach out to me, but it's the book Venture Deals. You put it on like 1.2 speed, and I think you can read it in 2.5 hours. All the stuff I said about Shark Tank, what I thought I knew about fundraising, which was freaking zero, just gives you the lay of the land on terminology. Our method, how we did this, is way different, and most people won't be able to do it the way we've done it. From a bank account to a small banking partnership to then an angel investor. And so that venture deals thing just really helps frame it up. Yeah, I don't really have anything beverage alcohol specific. We have a team of a lot of beverage alcohol professionals, and I try to stay away from being that person only because I think our success is blended between their brilliance and my ignorance. There's a lot of things we do that are not like any other business in our industry, and some of it are very smart people who work for Carbliss that said, "Hey, I've always done it this way and it sucks. Let's be different." And a blend of my ignorance of just not knowing. So we do what we think is best.
Yeah. So, Adam, this has been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the Business of Drinks.
Thank you so much for having me, Erica. Very much appreciate it.
Welcome back to Last Call. This is Caroline, and I'm joined by Scott and Erica. And we're sitting here looking at a really interesting pie chart that was recently shared by the American Association of Wine Economics. It is a visual representation of the leading wine suppliers in the US. And looking at this is a little shocking. I'm a visual person, and I knew that Gallo was the most prevalent wine supplier in the US, but 33% of case volume in wine is under the Gallo umbrella. That is about 102 million cases if we're talking 9-liter cases of wine. On top of that, the top 3 suppliers make up just about 50% of all wine sold. So that's Gallo, the Wine Group, and then Constellation Brands. So the Wine Group is making up about 10% and Constellation Brands about 6%. This data is from 2023. So I'm curious about how that evolved in 2024. Do you guys have any speculations?
I wouldn't perhaps pin any particular numbers to 2024, but if history has taught us anything, the big get bigger consolidation is an evergreen trend. What is surprising is how little things have changed over the last 10, 15 years. We'll link to it in the show notes, but a study from Michigan State University from 2011 revealed that again, over 50%, just over 50% of market share was, surprise, surprise, E&J Gallo, the Wine Group, and Constellation Brands. What has changed since 2011 is that E&J Gallo has gained market share. They went from about 23% to 33%, while Wine Group and Constellation has lost a little bit of share.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to me because I think that a lot of people in the industry may not realize just how much the big brands rule from both a sales and a case volume perspective. The top 10 brands, which rounding out, it's Gallo, the Wine Group, Constellation, Delicato, Trinchero, Deutsch, Treasury, San Michel Estates, and Palm Bay, and then Jackson Family and Rivoli. So, all of those taken together it's about 70% of the overall wine market. Only 29% is other brands. And when you're thinking about how many brands are on the marketplace, I mean, it's well over 10,000 brands. So how it's hard to understand as a new brand coming into the wine space, how to make an impact. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for new competitors when you look at just how entrenched some of the biggest players are and how they continue, like Gallo, to grow their market share with, juggernaut brands, everything from Barefoot to La Marca to RTD versions of every type of wine that they're making. So that's my perspective.
Yeah, and this shouldn't be a surprise because this is a commonality across business types, right? You look at restaurants and you could do the same thing by looking at McDonald's and Starbucks and Subways, right? It wouldn't surprise anyone to come to terms with the fact that those are the largest groups. Same thing with non-adult beverages. You look and it's Coca-Cola and it's Pepsi and it's Nestle. With regard to these wine suppliers, it's perhaps a little bit curious because the visibility isn't always there, right? We might think Gallo, but it's under the Barefoot name or the La Marca name.
There's the whole aspect to Gallo now with their Maze Row portfolio, which is all high end imports mainly, like Argiano. Well, Massican is now in that portfolio. So that's their way of also bringing in that aspect. They're trying to be a one stop shop for everything. I think what struck me, though, looking at this chart, was that in a lot of states, all of these suppliers are distributed by one distributor. So then you take into consideration, or just maybe two big names, you take into consideration trying to enter a market, and if you have a brand that's trying to be in every store, then those are the distributors that you need to be with. You want to be with the top players. But from experience, I've seen smaller brands, fantastic brands, really get lost in the mix of the numbers that we're looking at here when they go with the big player in a state, and they think because they have the distribution that will mean success for their brand. But a lot of times what matters more is aligning with a distributor that really understands what your brand goals are, I think.
Absolutely, right? You're not gonna win a game in which you're not well equipped. So if you're not ready for the major leagues, then perhaps, play at the level at which you're best equipped to be competitive. Work with the independent stores, work with the small restaurateurs, work with the folks that don't expect you to have a budget as large as one of the big guys.
Yeah, flood the zone. I think deep and not wide. I think a lot of the brands that we see succeeding and who we're talking to on the Business of Drinks podcast, they are finding traction going very deep in a couple markets first and then expanding out. And unless you have those deep pockets, that tends to be a fairly strong strategic approach.
Awesome. Well, that is all we have time for today. And if you're listening to this, please make sure you're following us on Apple, Spotify. Tap the notification button so you will know as soon as we post every single week. And please spread the word to those around you. Click the star ratings and share on social. It really, really helps us find new listeners. And last but not least, if you have questions or if you have a topic that you would like us to cover on the podcast, please reach out. We have our Instagram DMs open, LinkedIn DMs, and you can reach us at email at podcast@businessofdrinks.com. We will see you next time.